Have you found that most of your franchisees, is this their first business they're getting into, or are they experienced entrepreneurs from, past lives?
Yeah, we have a little bit of both, but I would find more often than not, this is their first entrepreneurial venture.
Sure.
To give you a sense of some of the kind of like categories we're going after, we have one of our first franchisee was a girl who was graduating high school, told her father, look, unlike my sister, I'm not really, I want to pursue in your entrepreneurial footsteps and I don't want to go to college like my sister.
Hmm.
And so I want to potentially start a business like you did, 30 years ago, and I want to be my own boss. And he said, well, let's start looking. And they negotiated with us. She found us, they negotiated, and training here is about 10 days. He
Hmm.
basically got her apartment for 2 months and said, you're moving to Miami and you're going to work in the store for 2 months.
Wow.
That girl in 60 days did not take one day off. She could have gone to the beach. So what I'm saying is like, there's one example of a young, and she's to this day, she's one of our best operators. She is extremely detailed. She's extremely on top of her employees. She does everything. When she needs something and she's in dire need, her father would
Hmm.
be like, okay, what can I help you with? Other than that, her father's letting her run the entire business. And
That's
she's now
awesome.
22 years old and she's looking for her second store, and we're extremely proud of her. But we also have people where husbands are doing full-time jobs, wives were focused so much on the kids, raising the
Hmm.
kids, that they're now looking to get back into some type of workforce, but they don't want to go into that 9 to 5, you know,
Right.
and they're
Sure.
saying, look, let's start a franchise that has a little bit of flexibility. I can get to a point where I hire people, guide people. But if I have to step out, if I have to go away for a weekend, I have a key manager who can run that. So there's a
Right.
little more flexibility with that. And then the last one that I'm really proud of is that hospitality person that worked in hospitality their whole life and
Hmm.
said, look, I'd really like to kind of start my own thing. Right.
Yeah.
They've ran restaurants, they've done the hotel stuff. They understand what customer service is. They understand what, working in a restaurant's like. Those guys have really been amazing operators for us.
Hmm.
So we have a little bit of everything to give you an idea of what we have.
Okay. David, all your years of being in Fran Dev and being in franchising in general, how effective have you found, or do you use a behavioral assessment program or a behavioral assessment test or anything to help yourself, giving yourself the edge that you're picking the right person? Or how do you pick the right person?
I have to first tell you that I love those tools. Those tools, I've been exposed to those tools in the past, and we are currently looking at bringing one of those tools in. One of the realities of this business is that this business is currently being funded by the founders.
Right.
And so we have to be extremely cautious of anything around costs and budgets and stuff like
Sure.
that. So we do look at bringing some of those things in, but I think it's probably going to be something closer to 2026 where we kind of roll something like that. In the meantime,
Hmm.
you're spending a lot of time with me.
Right.
I'm spending a lot of time talking to people,
Hmm.
and you're spending a lot of time with my partners.
Yeah.
We're not just asking you scenario questions, but we're also asking you, what are your failures? If you come to me and you've gotten to this stage in your life with no failures, I don't know if this is for you. You know what I
Great
mean?
point.
Because it's just, this is a business that it's not so much about whether you're going to fail. It's going to be how many times am I going to fail and get back up? Right?
Mm.
We're constantly failing here. And it's been great lessons that we learn. And I tell all my employees, you better be making mistakes. But what I don't want you to make the same mistake twice.
Exactly. Exactly.
But a lot of personal time talking. But I do believe that those assessments come in very handy. I have a lead generation tool that I'm using right now. I'll give a little shout out to Frank Connect. That's
Hmm.
been one of our early investments and continues to be an investment of mine. It monitors the sale process and can actually help me basically do my dual role as a franchise development head of
Hmm.
franchise development as well as CEO. And so I've have it all set up to automate emails and stuff like that. So that's been very helpful.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of the behavioral assessment tools. And I would tell founders that are listening to this that your brain is able to get away from it because of you, because you know what to sniff out for with your experience.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that experience in franchising and you're starting out, you can't afford to make
You
a
can.
wrong decision. Like that young girl that you've got, 22 years old, she was a needle in a haystack.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You
Yeah.
are absolutely right. And frankly, we've also made some mistakes, early,
We
early
all
on.
do.
with franchisees, and we've had to come in and step in, and frankly, just because they have the money, just because they have the interest, again, the type of franchisee you're looking for at early stage may not be the person with all the money, but it's really that person who's not afraid of getting out in that local community, being a good leader, and really looking at the numbers. Those three things for me is really pivotal. But when you're early stage and you get people to come in, it's, but we've learned from those mistakes, and now you chalk it off. Look, that is definitely not what we want, right?
Yes, exactly. I know that sometimes it's process of elimination. Like, okay,
Right.
I know I don't want that next time.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would say there is not a brand out there that doesn't have some of those stories. The problem is when I was at Burger King and Arby's and stuff like that, we had a lot of those stories. You can afford to make a lot of those mistakes. When you're at your early stage, you can't afford too many of those mistakes.
You are absolutely right. That is great advice, David. Great advice. Okay, let me ask you, what's the investment range to open a location?
Yeah, so the investment range, I tell people it's between $350 and $550 to open a store. That is a full turnkey number. The delta there is purely construction, right? I mean, and we're getting ready to open up a conversion. So for those of your listeners who don't know that was previously, in this case, it was previously an ice cream shop. Closed down. So we're getting a grease trap, we're getting a bathroom, we're getting a kitchen, we're getting a lot of the equipment in there, and we're just bringing in kind of custom made equipment for us, right? Front counter, back counter, seating, marketing. And so that's probably going to be a little under 300K. But then we have what they call a gray shell, brand new shopping center. Landlord hands me the keys. I walk in, there's dirt on the floor. There's no AC, there's no ceiling, there's no walls. And so those can cost you, north of $500,000. Obviously, the pros on those is that the landlord is usually willing to give you what's called tenant improvement allowance.
Yeah.
So you get, you get 40, 50, up to $100,000 in some of those cases. So
How big is the location? Yeah, how big is the location?
Anywhere between 900 and 1,100 square feet.
All right, so it's pretty tight.
Pretty tight. I am not a big fan of big spots.
I agree.
I keep in mind, this is not a typical restaurant. People coming in 10, 15 minutes. So, you get me 1,000 square feet. I'm really happy,
Right.
I'll give you one point of reference. Our highest volume store in the entire system today, and since the concept began, is still the first store. It sits in 680 square feet.
Wow.
And it does close to 900K a year.
That's amazing.
And so it is possible. It's, the visibility is great. The parking is great. The line is moving, and our production can produce 120 cups an hour. So the team there is phenomenal. So, bigger isn't always better.
Right.
So I am very sensitive to rent. And so that's why we have said no to a lot of sites because of rent. But that's that's just the nature of where we're at.
Yeah. David, where do you see this brand growing in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think what we're doing over the next 12, 18 months is we've still got some upgrades that we're really excited about on the technology side. We're probably going to be growing 3 to 5 locations over the next 2 to 3 years per year. And then I see ourselves getting to about 60, 70 locations, by the end of the decade. Maybe the start of, 2030, 2031, I could see us getting, right around 60 locations. So I'd say maybe 3 or 4 locations for the next 2, maybe 3 years, and then maybe jump to 7 or 8 stores a year.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this as a legacy business fit for Danny and Donna, right? Was
Danny and Donna, correct.
And yourself, or do you see them building this to a certain level and saying, we're going to roll this thing up and sell it? What do you think long-term plan is?
That long-term plan is actually tied into the earlier question. And I think our scalability is definitely tied to potentially bringing outside investors, because our scale is definitely limited by obviously the resources that we have.
Sure.
So the reason I'm mentioning that we'll probably start scaling up in 2 or 3 years is because we'll probably be ready to start entertaining those conversations with outside investors.
Right.
And start saying, okay, we're ready to start putting a little fuel on this fire. But until we get to a point where we really have kind of tested this thing out and really are ready to have those conversations, we're having conversations now, but I think maybe when we get to maybe, 30, 25, 30 stores, that's probably when we probably start getting on the radar to a lot more.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.